trained by the highest monks in the land, enthroned at age 15, and forced into exile to save his life and his religion a decade later. He would become known all over the world for his commitment to compassion, nonviolent resistance, and interfaith dialogue. They also have very different laughs. Tutu is known for his laugh, and if you have not ever heard it, I encourage you to just go Google Tutu laugh. It's one of those laughs that makes you laugh. I will be shocked if that doesn't happen to you. That's my testimony today. It's happening to me right now. You just can't help it. He gets going and can't stop, and you cannot help yourself from joining in. If you need a laugh, again, just Google Tutu and laugh. His Holiness, on the other hand, has what someone described as more of a Buddhist laugh, if such a thing existed. Both dedicated themselves to one another in a manner that was clear to any who witnessed it. Both authentic, both leaning in with curiosity, both humble, and both caring of the other and about the world. So let me share just a bit about what they meant by the pillars of joy before I focus on the gift of the relationship. Their baseline belief is that joy is a birthright. Joy is a birthright. And when they speak of joy, they aren't talking about the kind of joy that you get when you get those Star Wars socks or electronics, or the kind of joy you get when you take a bite of your favorite food, or you get a good grade or a raise, or complete a project. These two remarkable human beings, reflecting back on decades of religious leadership, are speaking to us about a joy that is only achievable through seeking joy for another person. Lasting happiness does not reside in fortune and fame, tells Tutu, but in our heads and in our hearts. And it is tied to that deep joy, and achieving that is within our power. The 8 pillars that they identified are perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. Perspective. In order to have empathy, we need to take what Tutu called a God's eye perspective, and regardless of your theology, it's a useful image, isn't it? Living in the land of I is a recipe, they say, for anger and frustration. We need to live in the land of we, always. Humility. They suggest we practice this line. Whenever I see someone, may I never feel superior. It's easy to read, harder to live, isn't it? But remember, we practice because we know that each of us is beautiful, flawed, and worthy. Humor. I've shared a little bit of theirs with you. It connects us by providing respite, certainly, but also it is a way for them to share and bridge emotions. Acceptance. His Holiness put it this way. Why? Why be unhappy about something that can't be remedied? Again, an easy sentence to read, more difficult to live. Forgiveness is the next. The 2 spiritual guides remind us that holding on and leaving space for anger and grief or any wish for vengeance hurts us and possibly others that we don't intend it to hurt. They do not suggest forgetting, but forgiving, and in doing so, holding on to our own power to move forward in joy. Gratitude. The Dalai Lama begins each day with these words. I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. Compassion. The 2 men agree that compassionate concern is part of our imprint. They believe that that's something we arrive with. We have an instinct to connect and an instinct to care, but it requires practice. His Holiness points out, on this planet, Over the last 3,000 years, different religious traditions have developed. And all of these traditions carry the same message, the message of love. So the purpose of these traditions is to promote and strengthen the value of love or compassion. So different medicine, he writes, but the same aim, to cure our pain, our illness. And generosity. The Archbishop offered a very memorable example in the importance of giving. He said the Dead Sea in the Middle East receives fresh water, but it has no outlet. So it doesn't pass the water out. It received beautiful water from the rivers, and the water goes dank. I mean, it just goes bad. That's why it's called the Dead Sea. It received, and it does not give. And we are made much that way too, he tells us. I mean, he said, we receive, and we must give. In the end, generosity is the best way of becoming more and more and more joyful. So that, friends, was a quick description of the gift that came from this birthday week. But as I mentioned earlier, I responded to something else that they gave. And I don't think that they gave it unintentionally. They gave themselves. You see, the book led me to the audio, which led me to the visuals, which led me to the still shots, which took me to the YouTube videos, and I actually saw them in action together. I heard the laughs. I saw them touch each other. I saw the playfulness as the Dalai Lama slapped the Archbishop on the arm in a playful moment, how they reached out and actually touched, how they opened themselves up to entirely different perspectives. One of the pillars, when the Dalai Lama suggested that the Archbishop should precede him to his heaven, since he knew the ropes and could put in a good word, there was some stretching going on there. And there was humility present when the Archbishop addressed the exiled Tibetan children, telling them like the children in his own country, one day they will be free in their own land, that they will return, that he is grateful on behalf of us all to India for preserving the treasure that is in them as the Tibetan culture. And then he shared with the children and the youth and the adults there that the world loves them, and that the world loves His Holiness, their spiritual leader. So much so that it has not gone unnoticed by Archbishop Tutu, that when he is coming to speak somewhere, they rent a hall. But when the Dalai Lama has come to speak, they have to rent a whole football stadium. He even shared that it made him a bit jealous. And that brings us to that third pillar of humor. I had read that the two of them were like school children in their sheer delight of one another. The laughter quotient is indeed high, and their mutual enjoyment, if you watch it at all, was unmistakable. Archbishop Tutu burst out laughing in formal settings when a few hard questions came the Dalai Lama's way, like how do we achieve world peace, was asked of the Dalai Lama, and Archbishop Tutu couldn't stop himself from laughing, pointing. Glad you got that one. They came very close to being able to book themselves as a comedy act. And I can't quite articulate, I've strived to articulate and find the right words to say how somehow powerful that is. That these two human beings were able to share the level of intimacy and trust that requires that kind of banter to be done without any harm at all. When the Dalai Lama took off the Archbishop's cap, he said, "You're looking like a monk now." It's so very clear that the role of humor was central to how they came to be friends. That the pathway to friendship and their own joy was about justice and peace and oppression and love, but they brought their full selves. Their full selves. And the manner in which two very serious leaders are able to talk about very serious matters without taking themselves too seriously is something to behold. Each of the pillars, those I've mentioned and the others, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity, were equally present throughout the interviews. These two men with waning energy met despite great difficulty, physically and politically, and created this gift for us. Not in some back room with some editors doing the bulk of the work. They did it in the open, as should be our aspiration in all that we do. That all that we do is worthy as a model to others, even when it's imperfect. That's one of the gifts they brought. Two men for whom freedom is a complicated state. Yet here, with the earned freedom of having only a polished product needing to emerge as a valued gift, instead they chose to show us all a living picture of what deep joy looks like, feels like, and sounds like. They did it throughout the week in their interviews with Abrams, and they did it magnificently at the birthday party at the end of the week. The two of them went to the Tibetan Children's Village, where thousands joined the school children in an 80th birthday party celebration for His Holiness. There were songs sung, the Tibetan version of If You're Happy and You Know It. There were words shared, and there were questions asked, hard questions of both men. And then the students sang We Are the World. And while they sang, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, 80 plus years, got up, and the man can dance. And he's dancing and dancing, and the man has rhythm, serious rhythm, and he likes company. So he looked over and sort of gestured a little bit to the Dalai Lama, who has monastic vows that prohibit dancing. So you have everything that they're teaching us present in that moment, don't we? On this stage, thousands of people around, and many cameras. But you know, watching it, that the love between the two is real, and so is the respect, and so is the joy. And again, I can't quite articulate it, but you know also that whatever happens next will be the right thing. And that's part of their message too. If you show up with authenticity and with care and compassion and all those pillars, whatever happens next will be the right thing. So I was uncertain as I watched this. Would His Holiness dance? Would the Archbishop stop? It's something I'm not imagining happening. And what I witnessed was companioning each other regardless. Tutu kept on grooving. His Holiness smiled. His Holiness got up so the Tutu would have a little company while he was grooving. I don't think he was dancing at the time, but it's hard to tell as you watch because of the robes. Everyone was singing. Joy ruled. And what they did next, I can only assume, was motivated by what they wanted for the other. I'm going with the belief that the Archbishop didn't start swinging him around because he was swinging around because he so valued the Dalai Lama's own agency. And I'm going with the belief that the Dalai Lama didn't remain seated because he so wanted the Archbishop's joy to be made fully present on that stage and not to cause him to think he should sit down. And so when he stood, I also believe he opened the door for something that couldn't have been possible otherwise. And that's the lesson I take from their time together. Because it's subtle, but friends, there is no mistaking that His Holiness's hips did sway.